of Eastern and Central Asia growing out of the teaching of Gautama Buddha that suffering is inherent in life and that one can be liberated from it by mental and moral self-purification. The teaching that nirvana, that is to escape from liability to suffering, is the highest goal attainable, and that the way of escape is the eightfold path of right belief, right resolve, right word, right act, right life, right effort, right thinking, and right meditation. All of the aforementioned are applicable and befitting in describing my topic today about honoring the dead, or our ancestors or forebears. It is also synonymous to our culture of filial piety, or of our fourth commandment, honor thy father and thy mother when alive. But what about afterlife? Then the Chinese turn to Qingming, which is a month-long memorial period during which the Chinese honor their ancestors by making pilgrimages to the cemeteries in remembrance of the deceased. Lin Yi Chung Association in Manor is usually the place where the first event is celebrated. Services are held before the grave of the Tai Kung San or Tai Ju, or if you so prefer, call it the Grand Ancestor's Tomb. Families and societies usually follow the generations participating. I might like to take time out to explain Lin Yi Chung. Lin literally means together, Yi means with pride, Chung means we are buried together. Put it all together, it means we are buried here with pride. During this month, thousands would come to the Mecca of our ancestors to pay respect with ambrosial food, fruits, wine, and roast pigs. Services are held before the grave of the Tai Kung San, the Grand Ancestor's tomb. Incense and candles are lighted. Fahu and paper banners are placed centrally on each headstone, anchored down with a stone or a clod of earth. And san chuk, the chopsticks with brown resin tips, are thrust into the ground to the right of the incense, and the candles as memorial markers to denote that this grave has been visited by filial descendants paying their respects. From experience, I might suggest that any of you family that have burials up there or any other place, when you put that clod of earth, perhaps you can change it and put a little rock and put it in a plastic bag, because the weather will get it and your tombstone is going to be dirty. I think we paid about $100 just to have it clean. You know? This comes from experience, of course. Long Cheong Sau Hill, longevity incense sticks are lighted and placed on the grave. Its smoke rising acts as a messenger to awaken the ancestors' soul that they are being honored. Smaller incense sticks also convey the same message. Red Chinese candles, called Cheong Sau Chuk, are likewise lit. Their flames licking skyward, creating a passage of communication. A banquet of 5 courses is set, and all is ready for the spirits of the departed to emerge and partake of the feast set before them. As you all know, Qingming is always April the 5th, except the leap year, which is next year. Then it is going to be April the 4th. And it's a Thursday. May I take this opportunity to invite all of you to participate. It would start about 9:30. On the altar is arranged 5 cups of tea, liquor, and rice, and 5 pairs of chopsticks. For small ceremonies, 3 cups are sufficient. Fish, chicken, pork constitute the samhyung, samsan rather, and all other courses are stewed oysters, tofu, shrimp, mushrooms, duck eggs, roast pork, and duck. Pork is the sacrifice for the pig demon of the underworld who has control over the release of the souls of the deceased who are paying their debts to the different realms of the netherworld. Oysters mean pronounced hoshi, good news or blessings. Tofu, abundant wealth. Shrimps, braised with shells on, offering to the watery realm. Also, they multiply in abundance, giving rise to many descendants. Chicken with mushrooms, sacrifice for the heavens. Mushroom is the food for the immortals. And duck eggs, symbol of the yin and yang principle of the universe life, which, when united, represented the virtue of benevolence, purity, prosperity, wisdom, and truth, and in addition to fertility, which ensures a large family. Their oval shapes and rounded contours are symbolic of a feeling of well-being and tranquility. On the right side of the grave, a small side altar is set up consisting of lighted incense, candles, samjuk, and a plate of boiled pork, and 2 unsalted duck eggs. The plain pork for simple taste of the land god, and the duck eggs, which came from the word ya, or ab, means to suppress, hence to suppress evil. This area is for the Sangha, or the keeper of the graves. When everything is set, the oldest member bows first and bows 3 times, that is for happiness, prosperity, and longevity. Then follows the oldest son, families, grandsons, and male descendants, first and female next, each bowing reverently 3 times. You see, the Chinese are great believers of boys come first. After paying the respects with bowing, paper money and gold and silver are offered in a choi bowl, or a treasure tray. In this is placed the spirit money called kamngan and tai sui, and set ablaze by igniting the gaichin, serving to bring the dead back. Cheong Song Heung are symbols of longevity, and 3 sticks are burned in respect to Tin, that's heaven, Di, earth, and Yan, man. It also represents happiness, prosperity, and longevity, heaven, earth, and water. Willow is considered protective against illness and evil spirits. Hence, it is used at Qingming time. It is a symbol of rain, fertility, and normally planted and grown in a cemetery. I have a very large willow tree in front of my yard. I asked my boys, would you like to have a willow tree and I can get it for you? They said, no, it might look like Manoa Chinese cemetery. And another friend said, all I have to do is bring a tombstone, then you can call me Tombstone George. Qingming is over 3,000 years old in China. Manoa Yicheng is only 106 years old chartered. However, we are actually 144 years old, 1851. And it is nostalgic to reflect the thoughts and hyperopia or farsightedness of our founders. They not only spent as much as 6 months of their salary in the purchase of this precious akakano, but they struggled to maintain this 34-acre cemetery with 10 other societies. We, the successors, are obligated to fulfill the founders' legacy of having a burial site for our progenies or future generations. Today, the 31 trustees have not only lived up to the above mandate, but have moreover fostered and perpetuated Qingming. We have what we call a modified program, East meets West program. We have pilgrimages from the base of the cemetery going up to the Kung San, the grand ancestor's tomb, and this year Khao Thom Post. Commander Chuang led us with the Royal Hawaiian Band. We have also a Chinese band to receive us as the Kat Heng Musical Club. We have color guards. We have taps, 21 salute. We play the national anthem, the Hawaii Ponoe. We have 15,000 flower drops. We have 500 balloon release, and in particular, that is for the dedication of the new gateway. And of course, Myriad fireworks. We have also arranged to have our eulogies be translated into English for the benefit of and the fruition of the younger generations. We have even provided microphone systems so that they can hear us. My days, we used to stand in the back when they say bow, we bow, and then we don't even know what's going on in the front. All we want is when shall we eat, you know? And here's the roast pig in the front there, you know? So the whole crux is trying to instill this culture into the younger generations, and we are doing everything possible. If you have any suggestions, we are open. We also have role models like Narcissus Queen and the Court, Miss Chinatown and the Court, Model Chinese Father and Model Chinese Mother as the first Chinese Citizen of the Year. The 31 trustees are usually descendants of the founders. In a way, you can say it's genetics, in that the successors are progenies of the founders. It is only when a family who doesn't name a successor, then the trustees will vote on a new trustee. In earlier years, the Chinese were very superstitious because it involves macabre or death. Others felt that the cemetery was badly neglected. I was warned by a certain party about not to accept the office of presidency of the Lin Yi-chung Association because presidents usually die in office. Well, this is my 8th year, and maybe I should stop here. Ironically, this same party recently approached me, asking me to reserve 2 choice plots for him and his wife. Well, I guess the race is on. In 1989, the cemetery was landscaped in commemoration of the bicentennial of the arrival of the Chinese from Hawaii, in Hawaii rather. And coincidentally, it was our Lin Yi-chung Association's 100th anniversary. It was then that the community leaders took a change of heart and decided to participate. We now have a list of over 100 requests for trusteeship. And you don't get paid as a trustee, it's volunteer. Keep in mind that we are mandated to 31 lifetime trustees because there were 31 founders. What about ghost stories? I noticed someone will be speaking on ghost stories. I don't mean to offend the gentleman. Well, ghost stories are not even given a second thought. Stories of fireballs and stalled cars are only assumptions. I guess the best way to handle it is to let it lie where it lays. Leave it to postulation. Call it, if you may, ipsi dixit or ipsi facto, meaning an assertion made but not proven, or it is a fact. Don't doubt what you don't believe. My nearest experience was one evening. It was a summer, 7:30 or so, I was watering the willows. And all of a sudden, 2 hands started to wave at me like this, and not like this. I'm sorry, it was like this. No, like this instead of like that. Well, anyway, I was scared to death. My hair stood up, and I think fast. I was thinking, I'm not a smart person, but I thought of what's the best way to get out of here. So I turned around, I was going to scale the wall. It was a pretty tall wall, you know. What about my car? Well, I care less about my car, you know. Then I said, well, maybe I'll gamble and I'm going to shoot the water at the two pair of hands. And I did. And the two voices call out and say, hey, Manong, Paisyan mo, kalapatay. It's only us drinking beer. They turned out to be two competitors. Competitors are people who drink with each other. They were not ghosts, but they were grave diggers taking a break after work. But I was really scared. Sometimes my wife wondered whether I'm coming home or not. I have stayed as late as about 10:30, the night before Qingming, when we put up the tent and so forth. And then I usually buy dinner for the staff. But they don't come and meet me at the bottom of the grave. They meet me on the top. So I have to drive all the way up with the lunch and dinner and so forth. And on my way down, I say, you know, Manong, you wait, you let me go first. And you follow me, okay? And so, in a way, I'm kind of brave. But if you want some real excitement, one day I'll give you a free tour of the boathouse. Ask Professor Daniel Kwok. He can give you a lot of details. The first time that I met him, he was escorting a widow whose husband rather, had committed suicide. And it was very nice of Dr. Kwok to be there. The boathouse stores the remains that were exhumed, but held up by the Board of Health from being shipped back to China pending cremation. Cremation is the least and the furthest in the mind of the Chinese in those days. But the Chinese believe that exhuming the remains, wash it, clean it, and properly place it in crocks or suitcases and rebury it will bring forth prosperity and posterity, money and generations to come. You might like to know the policy at the Living&Chung Association is once you exhume a body, that plot is reverted back to us, the association. And we usually give that to the trustees to be buried. They don't mind used material. But this practice of exhumation and burial is perhaps only 1,000 years old. Another significant location is the White Mount. It is a common grave of over 300 remains that were discovered during the development of the Mano Chinese Cemetery. It is not certain that they were all Chinese. So we do welcome all nationals. In 1948 and 1949, when the United States Army brought back remains of soldiers from Burma and Southeast Asia to Honolulu for identification, 6 Chinese pilots and soldiers and 1 woman were flown here in error. The Army requested that they be buried here, so the Living&Chung Association donated a common grave, and this particular grave is marked with serial numbers only. Each year, the Kowloon Post number 11, under Commander James Chong, would pay homage by placing flags and flowers on the Memorial Day and Qingming Day with a ceremony. May I introduce Commander James Chong. Thank you, Commander Chong. Commander Chong offers his services generously. He's a very unselfish person. Thank you, Commander. A little beyond the Mano Stream lies a historic home of nobility. It is said to be the resort for King Kamehameha and Queen Kaumanu. Some authorities said that after her death on June 5, 1832, she was buried in Manoa. And finally, the famous Chinese detective Charlie Chan is buried in the indigent area under the name of Chan Apana. How many of you know that? I think Commander Chong knows that. And Commander Chong put a little marker, orange marker. So if you get up to the Grand Ancestor's tomb and right by the faucet, there's one faucet there, and look down, you're going to see a little orange marker, this tall rod. And right about in the vicinity, you're going to find a name, Chan Honor. And Commander Chong always go down there and pay respect and clean it up. And this is not the Charlie Chan that you see in the movies. My daughter-in-law is Japanese, two of them. And when they heard about this, they wanted to visit the grave, and I was very proud that they came up and we took them down and we showed them all these highlights. Other distinguished burials are that of the Chun Hoons, Henry R. Wong, the first mayor of Chinatown and former owner of Wu Fat, Yang Anin, Wong Kok Hung of Tai Hing Company, Kim Ap-ching, president of American Security Bank, Chin Ho's dad, and our late president, Samuel S. Look, 10th ranked red belt jiu-jitsu professor. This year, a beautiful Chinese design gateway was dedicated on Qingming Day by Mayor Jeremy Harris. We have a picture of the dedication. We also have a picture of the ceremony, and we also have a picture of the people that come and attend the program. Help yourself when you have time, and we have booklets where we have pictures. Also joining us in the dedication was a donor of $10,000 worth of tiles from Taiwan. That's Mr. and Mrs. Danny H.C. Young and Mr. Harry H.W. Young. The architect and the designer was James C.M. Young. Ironically, he's my kid brother, 1 year below me, that's all. But I put my rank on him. And of course, Commander Chong helped us dedicate the gateway. The cost of the gateway is about $25,000. So when you take a look at it, it doesn't look like $25,000 worth. But if you were there from the very beginning and see how they had to dig about 6 feet down and put cement for a base, and the concrete is reinforced steel, you can see the value in it. And probably this will be permanent. In 1994, the Kuomintang organization donated 2 large and beautiful marble lines. It is placed side by side in the Grand Ancestors' tomb. Other organizations will be participating in the years to come. And if all goes well, a second gateway will be built at the Grand Ancestors' tomb. The cost will be much greater because of its location. It's very difficult to get the cement in there. Then the third phase is to rebuild the stage around the ancestors' tomb. All these costs are borne by rentals to Palais Hawaii and others, sale of graves, and donations. By the time we finish this project, the Mano Chinese Cemetery will resemble a Chinese rock garden with hundreds of palm trees, Manila and Royal, willow trees, beautiful Kauai tea leaves, and others, different assortments, colorful crotons, firecracker trees, and Italian cypress. Many thanks to our ground supervisor, Benny Sacro, and his staff. Feel free to tour this 34-acre Mecca of our ancestors at 3430 East Manoa Road. We have photos and short video that are here for about maybe 5 or 10 minutes. Help yourself to those. You will not only get to enjoy the ambience of the Ko'olau with Hawaii's iridescent rainbows, with gentle breezes sweeping by, drive up to the ancestors' tomb for a panoramic view and photograph the jungles of Waikiki hotels, beckon with clear blue Pacific. Truly, a peaceful and perfect site for a final resting place. And for the living, the ideal spot for mental and moral self-purification and escape from suffering. The Chinese are great believers of feng shui. Feng shui is finding a good location And the founders, when they found this particular node, they saw the mountains in the back and the ocean in the front. Chinese like to be buried that way. Next Qingming falls on April 4th, 1996. It's a Thursday. Because of leap year, join us in enjoying the Eightfold Path of right belief, right resolve, right word, right act, right life, right effort, right thinking, and right meditation. A true tapestry of honoring our ancestors and forebears. Meke aloha haole ahuyo. With everlasting love, till we meet again.
Now, you know, George is not only a great raconteur, but he's also a philanthropist of the first order. The incident he mentioned, he merely let the ashes of his student be placed at the Manoa Cemetery for free to a young student widow. And it was not my student. We did it both, did it on impulse. So we helped out. There is a photograph of the buffalo that should make its way back to the venerable Yinglan. I think that's his photograph. Our third event this afternoon is a talk by my colleague, Edward Davis, assistant professor of history at the University of Hawaii, whose special period is on the Song, Tang Song period. He received his PhD from the University of California at Berkeley, and he joined my department 2 years ago. And we've been so fortunate to have him with us. His topic today is on spirit possession and the Grateful Dead.
Hello, welcome. Hello. The title of my lecture may seem a little obscure to some of you. Its meaning will become obvious towards the end of it, however, and I won't explain it now. What my talk is about today is precisely that large ritual complex from which the chants performed so beautifully by Reverend Yinlan, performed for us by him. This is the Great Retreat of Water and Land. That is the name of the ceremony. And by choosing to chant both in Buddhist and in Taoist modes from that ceremony, he also beautifully demonstrates my point of this lecture, which is the Chinese as well as the Buddhist origin and nature of this ceremony. Now, the publication in 1985, it was published a large body of 15th century Buddhist paintings. And this drew the attention of many of us and many reluctant art historians to a very neglected complex of rituals. 139 scrolls were recovered from the Baoning Monastery, the Baoning Si, in northwestern Shanxi province. These were created for the Shui Lu Jai, or the ritual or ceremony of water and land. Most of the paintings depict members of the pantheon, a remarkably inclusive one. There are 19 Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, as well as 10 kings of spells, Vidyarajas. There are also followed by a great host of Indian and Chinese gods, with astral deities being especially numerous. Now, when we come to the gods of the earth and waters, Chinese visions tend to supplant Indian ones. We find the lords of the 5 peaks, 10 dragon kings, and then the 10 kings of hell and their kind of infernal followers. There are scrolls that illustrate demons, ghosts, and hell beings of all sorts, monstrously formed or undergoing horrible tortures. The entire invisible world is there, from the heights to the depths, portrayed with a lot of epic verve. Now, most arresting of all these 25 paintings that came at the end of the series, in contrast to the divine or demonic contents of the other scrolls, they depict human figures and scenes from social and anti-social life. There are, on the one hand, all these paragons and patriots. One painting shows a group of Chinese emperors of former times, another empresses. Loyal ministers are there and generals, and one scroll depicts worthy Buddhist monks, another Buddhist and Taoist nuns, and still another noteworthy Taoist masters and scholarly laymen. There are outstanding moral exemplars, men of proverbial filial piety, women of proven chastity. And one scroll even commemorates assorted professions, with diviners, entertainers, and merchants representing daily life right on the margins of respectability. In contrast to these pictures, the remaining ones are devoted to lesser, sadder faiths. In wild landscape country and detailed domestic interiors, the paintings show assorted modes of poverty, misery, and violent death. There are people fleeing from the troops and abandoning wives and children, and there are people in the agonies of death by fire, suicide, starvation, stabbing, poisoning, drowning, and even judicial execution. There are travelers perishing on the road, far from home, murdered by brigands, and there are women dying in childbed. A final scroll depicts the ragged consolers of the poor, a shabby exorcist with musicians and actors. They are far drabber band than the entertainers who divert the well-to-do. These scrolls, which were found in 85, are in excellent condition. They were repaired and remounted in 1705 and again in the 19th century. They were said to be hung on the monastery once every year on the anniversary of the Buddha's birth, the 8th day of the 4th lunar month. They are numbered on the back, allowing them to be arranged in a proper ritual order. And just as the upper echelons of the pantheon consist mainly of tantric deities, so that the commander of this huge assembly is Vairochana, the Dharmakaya or cosmic Buddha who dominates the tantric Buddhism in China and Japan. Another corpus of water and land paintings was published in 1984. It was found at a monastery that bears Vairochana's name, the Bilu Se, in Hebei province. In this case, the images are permanently in place, being painted on the walls of a separate chapel behind the main hall. This special building served as a central focus when the water and land rituals were performed in this monastery. Now, in our time, and I want to talk about now how this ritual was performed, in our time, the most spectacular performances are held in Buddhist monasteries and normally last a full week. They often coincide with the Ghost Festival in the 7th month, but are by no means limited to any one time of the year. Some monasteries were accustomed to carry out the Shuilu or water and land ritual 4 times a year, once each season. At Gold Mountain Monastery, on the south bank of the Yangtze River downstream from Nanking, the ceremonies were performed 7 times annually. The ritual was something of a specialty at Gold Mountain, since the ritual was supposed to have originated, in fact, at that monastery. At the nearby monastery of Baohuashan, renowned throughout China as a great ordination center, the Shuilu was held twice yearly in conjunction with the mass ordinations carried out in spring and winter. During these periods, in addition to the 200 resident monks, some 500 ordinands would be staying at Baohuashan. This huge meeting of monks would swell the processions and chanting and make the giant ritual all the more impressive. The ordination weeks were a time of special strictness, hence also of special purity, and would attract large numbers of well-to-do lay patrons from nearby urban centers in Jiangsu province. Let me just summarize some of the characteristics of the Shuilu ritual before telling you what happened. First of all, this ritual is huge. It's big. Whenever possible, is conducted on a scale fully commensurate with the entire corpus of paintings which I just described. It demands many performers, usually 60 ordained monks, plus numerous extras. Considerable space is needed as well. Even if the monastery maintains a special hall for the purpose of the ritual, the stage properties spill over into other buildings. As we shall see, there are two sets of altars, an inner altar and an outer altar. Procession of monks and acolytes periodically move from site to site, wending about the entire monastery. And of course, large numbers of lay visitors, the sponsors and beneficiaries of the ritual, must be lodged, fed, and entertained. A proper shuilu is very long. It takes precisely about 7 days and 7 nights. The shuilu is also large and ambitious in its aims. It undertakes to save not only the dead ancestors of its sponsors, but all the dead, the orphan spirits that wander among men with no one to make offerings to them, as well as the famished ghosts and all the other tortured beings that inhabit the hells. It is in fact the culmination of all rites of offering to the dead, a ritual of sacrificial feeding and symbolic cleansing which leads the spirits of the dead to rebirth in paradise. The shuilu thus dominates all public ceremonies of ancestor worship, as well as all the other palliatives against the potentially dangerous wandering souls. Yet if the shuilu is thus the really yin Chinese ritual, the yin ritual, for the benefit of the dead, it also presents the ultimate yang ritual for enhancing the status of the living. The merit amassed through making offerings on such a gigantic scale will naturally be entered on the donor's otherworldly accounts. Not only will this help them towards a fortunate rebirth, it will also be reflected in their present lives by radiant health and increased prosperity. These are, of course, the corollaries of all ritual well performed, but in opening up such a grand field of merit to potential patrons, the creators of the shuilu ritual were also offering the ambitious a significant channel for increasing their prestige amongst their fellow men. It is not surprising then if, in addition to dominating the Ghost Festival of the 7th month, in some parts of China, the shuilu might be a major ritual event in any or indeed every season of the year. Now, great rituals have always rejoiced in really grandiose titles. The name of the 16th century manual from which all others derived about this ritual by the great monk Zhu Hong was entitled Protocols for the Performing of the Feast of the Victorious Assembly of Water and Land for the Saints and Commoners of the Entire Universe. Zhu Hong explains this modest title point by point. The meanings of the terms are obvious enough, but the expression saints and commoners requires some comment. It is already found in 11th century manuals. There are 4 classes of saints and 6 of commoners. The saints are the Buddhas, the Bodhisattvas, the Pratyeka Buddhas, and the auditors. And they are feasted in the upper hall of the monastery. The 6 classes of commoners brought to the lower hall are denizens of the 6 modes of rebirth: gods, titans, humans, hungry ghosts, animals, and hell beings. But despite this distinction, Zhu Hong is at pains to stress the universality of the ritual. All these beings, from the noblest to the most vile, have the same Buddha nature, the potential for achieving enlightenment. Though a great banquet necessitates a hierarchical order of service, this feast is truly intended to be shared by all, and may be compared to the great Christian All Souls and All Saints Day, the All Saints Day first, and then the All Souls or Commoners Day the following day, and this is in a way a very similar structure. Now, Zhu Hong's manual was based on manuals from the 12th and 13th century when this ritual was elaborated. His manual also became the basis for all subsequent manuals into the 19th and 20th century. Let us then use it to briefly describe the main events of this ritual, and then I will try to give an explanation. During the shuilu weeks, the ritual overwhelms large tracts of monastic territory, halls, walkways, and courtyards. But the vital action is concentrated at 2 altars, or ritual areas, the inner altar and the outer altar. The operations carried out at the circular inner altar are said to benefit the living. At the outer altar take place rites for the benefit of the dead. Now in the afternoon, before the Shui Lu starts, a penitential text is recited at the inner altar to the accompaniment of a small bell and drum. Penitence is the essential preliminary to all miracles of transformation that follow. One team of monks is assigned to the inner altar, another to the outer. The outer altar has 6 foci or centers, independent ritual areas. The first is the great altar, where a squadron of 24 monks recite and perform the Liang Emperor's ritual of penitence, a work attributed to the Emperor Liang Wudi of the 6th century. At the altar for various scriptures, 7 monks recite an assortment of sacred texts. 7 monks chant the Lotus Sutra at the altar of the Lotus of the Law, and another 7 intone the name of Amitabha at the Pure Land altar. 2 monks recite the Huayan or Avatamsaka Sutra at the Huayan altar. The 6th focus is the Yoga or Tantric altar, also called the altar of edible offerings. It is here that the rites of feeding the flaming mouths or hungry ghosts are performed every night during the Shui Lu's duration. The ritual is said to require at least 60 ordained monks, but the principal activity is carried out by a team of 4, the chief priest, who is responsible for the mantras, mudras, and visualizations, 2 readers, a lector, and an assistant lector, who recite numerous official documents, and then the master of the feast, who takes charge of the offerings. The activities of the first day of the ritual proper open at the 3rd watch, or 3 or 5 o'clock in the morning, with the sprinkling and purification of the ritual area. The monks start with the outer altar and proceed to the inner, reciting mantras to seal off these regions from the profane world. The manual provides the text of all the necessary incantations, as well as describing the contents of the chief priest's visualizations step by step. It also gives the full text of all the numerous official documents that are read out as the ritual proceeds. By means of mantras and visualization, the chief priest is able to summon a host of spirit messengers who will carry the announcement of the feast to every corner of the universe. Banners are erected on tall masts, which clearly indicate where the ritual is being held and serve as temporary perches for the spirits when they arrive. At 7 o'clock, the 4th watch, on the morning of the 2nd day, the grand assembly of saints are invited to the inner altar. The occasion is a great communal bath, prepared by mixing ground camphor, saffron, and sandalwood with hot water. The mixture is placed in 2 bowls, one for male, the other for female, and surrounded by a curtain. The chief priest then issues the invitation to an extraordinary bathing party, beginning with the cosmic Buddha Vairochana, the Dharmakaya, or body of the law, the biggest body of them all. The list extends down through the patriarchs of the Shui Lu ritual, and in a 19th century text, they are joined by 2 later Shui Lu personalities, the 13th century Buddhist historian Zhirpan, and the 16th century Zhu Hong himself. The Indian deities and these worthy Chinese, who include also the very pudgy poet Su Shi from the Song dynasty, all join this colorful line at the bathhouse. When all have arrived, the bath curtains are lowered and the monks and lay sponsors are able to sit down for a short rest. As soon as 2 inches of incense have burnt away, they all rise again, and the chief priest pronounces a mantra which clothes all the freshly bathed spirits. His associates then read out a long series of formal statements to the deities, excuse me, requesting their full participation. How the monks and laymen and lay donors now spend the rest of the day is not specified, but at 7 o'clock on the morning of the 3rd day, the deities in the upper hall are all fed. They are served an ample and diverse meal, including tea, cooked rice, and vegetarian dishes, all set out on the little tables bearing their tablets beneath the paintings. In addition to these specially prepared treats, they are also given the standard ritual offerings, lamps or candles, incense, flowers, and fruit, as well as small volumes of scripture representing the gift of the law or dharma. There are also quantities of small paper money. The chief priest systematically goes down the list of distinguished guests, category by category, presenting the offerings to the assembled spirits using mantras, mudras, and visualizations, as well as much ringing of the Vajra bell. The reading of additional statements follows. At the 5th watch, or 9 o'clock, another ceremony begins in the upper hall. The deities are entreated to grant pardon and remission to all other beings, and particularly to all the other lesser spirits who have still yet to be bathed or fed. Afterwards, at noon, a vegetarian banquet is served to all the monks who have been working at both the inner and outer altars, and they are also given little gifts of money. Operations in the lower hall begin early in the morning of the 4th day. At the 3rd watch, 3 o'clock, the lesser spirits are summoned, the planetary gods and astral deities, as well as the commoners of the invisible world. 2 hours later, during the 4th watch, they are all bathed. The procedure follows the one used in the upper hall. In this case, though, there's an effort to avoid the grotesque mingling of species. The chief priest first visualizes the entire group as being transformed into the semblance of men and gods. Elsewhere in the text, it is stated that the gods in the ritual look like Taoist priests, and the men resemble Confucian scholars. It is as very sedate, respectable group, then, that all the spirits now step into the bath. Once bathed, the spirits then have a sermon preached to them. Next, the precepts which must be obeyed by bodhisattvas are first expounded, then administered. In fact, the spirits are treated just like new converts, with courtesy and a certain condescension. The revival meeting atmosphere is even more apparent on the 5th day, which opens at 5 in the morning with a long bout of hymn singing. A hymn is intoned promising salvation to all in the radiant golden light. Now all duly bathed, between 7 and 9 o'clock, the spirits of the lower hall, who are now all duly bathed and indoctrinated and inducted, finally receive their own banquet. By the time all the various classes of beings have been asked to eat, the monks have fully earned another noon meal of their own. At 5 o'clock on the morning of the 6th day, the monk starts with more hymns, then goes on to recite a whole new series of documents. Their object is to transfer the merit which they have gained through their benevolent ritual deeds. Buddhist monks regularly renounce the credit that ritual brings to them. They send it on to their supporters by a formal transfer of merit, or in this case, to all the creatures in the universe on whose behalf they have been acting all along. Afterwards, if one wishes, the ceremony of releasing living creatures may be performed. Animals specifically bought for the purpose are solemnly given their freedom. That night, a great feeding the flaming marrows takes place at the yoga altar, the tantric altar, attended by all the monks and laymen. On the morning, and this is the last part, of the 7th day, the grand general offerings are made, this time in both the upper and lower halls, a truly universal feast. After the monks have lunched in their turn, the spirits from both halls are conducted to the outer altar. The saints are also sent back to their respective otherworldly abodes in the course of the afternoon. As usual, the most dramatic events are reserved for after dark, when the texts of all the official documents read out in the course of the ritual are burnt, along with all sorts of other paper, talismans, spirit money, boats, and pavilions. A final feast is set out for the hungry ghosts, and the Shuelu proper comes to an end before midnight. But the spirit commoners from the outer altar apparently continue to loiter on. Well fed and fully indoctrinated, they are no doubt lounging around in an unaccustomed state of drowsy bliss. In any case, the 19th century manual makes provision for them to receive another sermon the following morning. Now that we have scanned the proceedings from the point of view of the priest, we must seek our own vantage point. The need is all the greater because learned Buddhist ritualists might differ on even the most basic terms about this ritual. For example, in the 13th century great historical work on Buddhism, this explains the Shuilu, or water and land, in reference to two distinct modes of making offerings. It says, food for divine spirits, or immortals, is placed in flowing water. Food for ghosts is placed on purified earth. This is certainly not the way the divine spirits were fed in Zhuhong's 16th century Shuilu manual, nor is it the explanation that Zhuhong gives of the ritual's name. He states that spirits dwell in air, earth, and water. It is because the sufferings of those dwelling in earth and water are greatest that the ritual is called water and land. Now, no ritual explanation need ever be absolutely true. Both observations have merit. Now, whatever, and I'd like to conclude now with my own ideas about this, whatever the origins of its various components, the Shuilu ritual is emphatically Chinese ritual. Moreover, in Zhuhong's world of the 16th century, only Tibetan and Mongol monks remained exclusively immersed in tantric rituals. The dominant strains in Chinese Buddhism were Pure Land and Chan. The Chinese masters who carried out Shuilu performances were primarily identified with the Pure Land lineage, as was Zhuhong himself. So let me suggest that despite the fact that the Shuilu paintings we have found derive from two northwestern monasteries honoring Vairochana, despite the fact that one can try to explain the prominence of bathing and feeding in terms of tantric ritual, and despite the fact that the Shuilu, or water and land ritual, is associated with other tantric mortuary rituals supposedly begun in the time of the Emperor Liang Wudi, this ritual, the Shuilu, is Chinese through and through. It made its first appearance in the 10th century, not in the 6th century, as tradition maintains. Just like other Chinese rituals to the Chinese 10 kings of hell, it included all Chinese gods, both national and local, as well as many historical figures. And the central events of bathing, clothing, and feeding the saints and commoners who are summoned to the inner and outer altars clearly have Chinese precedence. The meal was just as, if not even more important and central to Chinese religious ritual as to Indian and tantric ritual. Food and feeding, in fact, can be said to define Chinese religion. Moreover, the central events of the Shuilu ritual, the summoning and then bathing, clothing, and feeding of the commoners and saints, has a precedent in classical Chinese funeral rites. After a person had died in classical China, relatives first summoned the soul into the corpse. They next placed the corpse on a couch in the mourning hall of the home, and then they bathed the corpse, attired it in new clothes, and fed it with offerings after opening the mouth with a spoon. And in Taoist death rituals as early as the 4th century AD, the soul of the deceased was also summoned and then shampooed, bathed, clothed, and fed by the chief priest before being transformed into an immortal. For centuries, Taoists and Buddhists, in fact, have run neck and neck in the lucrative race to save men's souls. By the 4th century, the mortuary rituals of each religion were evolving in resonance with each other. Thus, even as Chinese Buddhist monks drew into their rituals a growing number of Chinese rites and deities, so Taoists adapted many Indian personalities and procedures. Far more significant than simple borrowings from each other, though, were the subtler forces of inspiration. Over the centuries, Taoist masters demonstrated an extraordinary flair for creating new Taoist rituals and deities using the stimulus of Buddhist models. This has nothing to do with plagiarism or slavish imitation, of which Taoists have been accused by those who have no direct knowledge of their writings. Such cases do indeed exist, but the same charge can be laid to Buddhist authors. More interesting questions revolve around the wellsprings of modern Chinese ritual culture, a remarkable blend of the most diverse elements, both Indian and Chinese. The original nucleus of relevant Taoist rituals fall under the rubric Feast of the Yellow Register. The Yellow Register is associated with earth and the dead. The corpus seems to have steadily expanded over the centuries, just like parallel Buddhist rituals of salvation. But judging by the texts that remain, the 12th century saw an astonishing proliferation of variant methods. Every Taoist lineage had its own elaborate version, a lengthy composite ritual to save great numbers of the dear departed. The generic name of such rituals is lian-du, or salvation through smelting, through refinement, as in metallurgy. Their aim is well expressed by a Taoist author writing at the end of the 12th century. The ritual salvation through smelting promotes ordinary commoners to the status of saints. It is a procedure of plucking them forth from the matrix and changing their very substance. The metallurgical metaphor is deftly turned, and we have not yet encountered it among the Buddhists. But these commoners and saints are already familiar. They are the two categories of otherworldly beings invited in the Xuelu feast. The Buddhist monastic ritual is extravagant and complex, but by selecting it as our focus, we drastically simplified the task. Whatever the early history of salvation through smelting, by the 12th and 13th centuries and into today, many masters were eager to write down their own special instructions for performance. What we find in these rituals, these Taoist ones, is that there is bathing, clothing, and feeding. There is penitence and the imposition of vows. Water, too, may play a central role. The corpus includes rites of refinement by water. The dominant medium of transformation, however, is the opposite end of the spectrum of elements. It is fire. And Taoist masters have drawn a long liturgical tradition in which alchemy provides a compelling set of metaphors. And by this conscious antithesis, by the use of fire rather than water, the Taoists developed their own spectacular rituals of transformation in counterpoint to the Buddhist extravaganza. Nowadays, either version, the Taoist or the Buddhist, may be performed on the general title of Pudu, or Ritual of Comprehensive Salvation, and the performers may be as various as the ritual itself. There's one recent book by a Japanese scholar which includes photographs and some representative groups of those performing these, and both Buddhist monks and Taoist priests are shown in Pudu performances. In one photo, a Taoist master holds a 5-pointed Vairochana crown, usually thought of as being the exclusive headgear of the Buddhist officiant. Finally, let me say that in the Sung dynasty, in the 12th and 13th century, when the performance of the water and land retreats began, there was something even more emphatically Chinese about this ritual. All first-hand accounts of performances of Xuelu or water and land rituals in the 12th and 13th century indicate that the central event of this ritual, from the point of view of the participants, was the actual appearance of a lost loved one in the flesh. In one case, a Xuelu performance at Gold Mountain Monastery had the power not only to cause the dead to appear to the loved ones, but to actually come back to life. The appearance of the dead was just as central to Taoist rites of universal salvation. In these, after the soul was summoned into the ritual area, a son or grandson of the bereaved household would actually become possessed by the deceased parent. The central importance to the Chinese of the appearance or embodiment of the dead goes back, I believe, also to ancient Chinese classical ritual. Among the aristocracy of the Zhou dynasty, in the first millennium BC, a grandson of the deceased would be led into the ancestral temple, clothed and fed, and then would become possessed by the deceased. An invoker would then pass on his blessings to the family members. Just as in the later Buddhist water and land and the Taoist yellow retreat, the dead would pass on his gratitude to the survivors directly or through the mouth of his young descendant. In the 5th century BC, when Confucius said, "Worship the spirits of the ancestors as if they were present," Qi Shen Ru Shen Zai, the Chinese of later times understood this quite literally. Thank you.
We now will have a response by Dr. Ling Yutan from San Francisco. I think you met him this morning. He did his work at the National Taiwan University and received his doctorate in logic from Berkeley. And he will now do his response, and then we'll have discussion afterwards.
I will just try to make some remarks about all the talks that we have heard today. For example, when I listened to the talk by Reverend Fisher, he quoted several poems by the famous Chinese Han layman Pang Jusi. And so at that time, my thinking is that, now so many people like to talk about Han, and often what they are talking about is more or less just at the level of concentration meditation, that kind of meaning, or vipassana, be aware, be present. Yeah, but so far as I understand it, the time that people like Pang Jusi was, practicing is at a higher level. It's the realization of the Dhammakaya. It's at that level. And I have a book on Chinese Pure Land, following the teachings of Yogi Chen, I went into more detail about that. So perhaps people who are interested in this can take a look. And I think, when I heard Miss Yu Pang Lao talk about her service to the community, I think we all should say our thanks to those kind of service. Yeah. To many immigrants here, it's so important to have someone who, understand your situation and try to help from your point of view, Yes. And about the Alzheimer's disease, Sister Chun, she mentioned that one of the problems is that in other important events in life, you have a ceremony to mark the occasion. But in this case, it's a long process, and so it's like a blurred reality. However, the other way to solve this problem is maybe we reflect on it and say, oh, the way we look at reality should, instead of being static, being definite, rather we change that view to a dynamic view of reality. The reality is flowing, changing. It's actually like that. Even marriage, you say, oh, wedding marks it, but the real marriage itself is also an evolving process. So we should not find it so difficult to look at, to accept Alzheimer's, as a blurred thing, Actually, it's always like that. And of course, the problem about this kind of view of reality as something that's constantly changing is that then you have anxiety because it's uncertain, right? And to counter this kind of anxiety, my belief is that simple Buddhist practice that involves pure sensation is usually very helpful. For example, chanting is good because it tries to bring you back to pure sounds.
direct experience. The reason that we have difficulty going through life is because we are engulfed in our concepts. And then there's always a fighting of concept and reality. So that makes it much more difficult. So if you build up the practices that bring you to the immediate senses, then that will help you to free you from those, conceptual engulfment. Yeah. And of course, that's not enough, but that's one basic practice to work on. And another aspect that you need to rely on to help you to free you from sorrows is to involve in selfless practices. Do whatever you can in life, help as much as you can. And through the accumulation of selfless service, you'll find comfort and happiness in life. Venerable Karma Lecture Tomo mentioned, when different cultures encounter, we experience many difficulties, and of course, with someone so resourceful like her, she can try to figure out solutions. But how about the rest of us? So that shows, it is very important that we have a basic practice of our own, because sometimes our situation, is beyond one person's ability to handle. But you need at least some peace inside to make a better situation of it. So that shows the importance of building a practice, because knowing the teaching of Buddhism is not enough. It may help you when there's no immediate or real problems. But when you have to go through difficult times, you need to build a practice, before you have that, so that you have some inner strength to go through. And then about the talk by Venerable Inland, of course, in his teaching, there are many precious teachings contained in his talk. And when he discussed the topic about carrying karma to the Pure Land, it's a famous phrase used by many Chinese Buddhists, 带业往生, to carry the karmas. However, since we don't have much time to go into detail, I just would like to bring out some points that we have to be careful about if we talk and think in terms of carrying the karma, because one immediate difficulty in this kind of phrase is that then how do we distinguish Pure Land from the realms of transmigration if karmas can be carried there, And he cited as reason for establishing carrying the karma to the Pure Land is because he said in the sutras, they say there are people of different levels all go to the Pure Land. Or if there are levels that should be decided by different karmas. However, actually, if we study the sutras carefully, actually, before 带业往生, before carrying the karma to go to the Pure Land, usually it's said, through Buddha's grace, 藏佛慈力, through Buddha's grace, you can do this. Actually, a better way to phrase it is, instead of saying carrying the karma, is through Buddha's grace, your bad karmas are purified. Then you go to the Pure Land. So it's 消业往生 instead of 带业往生. Purify your bad karmas, then go there. But then he can say, how come there are different levels? Well, their levels are decided by their lack of merit or their degree of maturity in wisdom and compassion. If you understand it this way, then there's no difficulty. You won't say, oh, then where do we draw the line between Pure Land and the realms of transmigration? Yes. And also, I think we also should thank the Lin Yi Chong Society, for their service to the overseas Chinese, because the Chinese always like to be buried back home. 落叶归根, you're supposed to go there. Now they're offering you the second best. You bury with your folks. So it's a great service to us. Yeah. And thanks to Professor Davis for explaining to us in such great detail with such scholarship. The most famous ritual for the purification and also the increase of merits of the deceased and the living. Yeah. And also, his observations also supports what I say in the beginning, in real practice, it's usually Buddhist and Taoist mixed and Confucianism all mixed in our lives. Just like in Japan, the Shinto and the Buddhist practice goes side by side. Of course, Puritans like to say, oh, that's not Buddhism, but the reality, very few people understand Buddhism so deep that they can say, this is right, this is wrong, or just follow the tradition. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Yeah, it does have its own independent development, and it's not necessarily, that's why I distinguish between the ritual from the point of view of the priest, from the point of view of the participant. And it seemed that particularly in the Song Dynasty, when this ritual was elaborated, it was that point. It was at a certain point when the soul was summoned, all the saints and commoners were summoned, that the power of the ritual made the participants, that is, the people who had paid, given a donation so that their ancestor would be recognized, along with all the commoners and saints. The ritual was so powerful to them that they would envision their deceased at that time. And there are accounts of this described. And so from the point of view, what I'm distinguishing is that this is a Buddhist ceremony with a Buddhist message. And the participants are probably for the most part lay Buddhists as well. However, for many of them, the intimacy with the dead, which is so important to the Chinese, was retained in this type of setting. but it's not central to the Buddhist conception of this, nor is it mandatory. I mean, it's something that we only see at certain times in certain places, particularly in Southeast China and in Taiwan, and it's more prevalent in the Taoist versions of this than in the Buddhist one. Does that help?
Could I ask some more questions about this? Again, the Buddhist, we sometimes talk about the 49-day service, and then the rebirth. Could the ancestors, these selected examples, if they've been there 3 years, 5 years, 10 years,
yes,
they might they also reappear?
They might reappear, but it's only in the case that they had not been through this ceremony once before. In other words, once they're reborn, they will not reappear. Once you've gone through the ceremony, even in the Taoist fashion, and you've become an immortal, you will no longer appear. It's in that transition. Basically, it applies to those who are just deceased, and it's in that transition between either dressing the corpse and burial, or before the final rites are performed. So it only occurs in that liminal period before the spirit is transformed into a new life.
Could I ask Dr. Lin if those ceremonies, because they happen occasionally in San Francisco or in California, or just your experience with that?
Well, day before yesterday at the banquet, I just heard one of the ladies present. She mentioned that when a few years back she attended one such ceremony in Taiwan or in Southern California. Another lady actually saw her parents came, and she didn't see anything, but she felt a cold wind on her, and her body became cold, and then she just kept crying. And all these kind of possibilities were foretold by the monk presiding the ceremony. Yes.
May I add a little bit to that, Professor Chapel? Many times when we're having a Qingming ceremony, like you see in this picture here, during the course of the ceremony, all of a sudden we find there's a strong wind comes by. And we were told by the priest that the spirits had come back to thank us, and it's a good omen. But no harm has been done. The many times that I've been up there, I don't have the fear like I used to. My mother used to tell me, don't go up there after 12 o'clock. And I guess she's kind of superstitious, very superstitious. She doesn't even go under the ladder, and she's afraid of number 13, you know, what you call it, Christophobia. And my wife would stick a piece of onion and pomelo leaf in my pocket. And then after a while, I just don't tell her, I just leave and go on no, and she gave up. And my friends call and says, where's George? He says, oh, he went up to landscape his next home.
I myself have a story. When I worked in Kali Salama Development Service Center, we used to have a volunteer comes into our office every Wednesday morning from 8 o'clock to 12 o'clock to answer phone calls for us. This lady just happened to be a Chinese, a local Chinese who knows how to speak Zhongshan dialect, and became very friendly with me for 10 years. And also to help her to read Chinese better from China. One day, all of a sudden, she fell down from the chair when I was out to lunch. Most of the staff were out to lunch. So she had a heart attack. When I came back, and she was in the hospital, somebody told me about that lady was in the hospital. So I stayed in the office that day. It was about 6 p.m. I usually work very long in my office. And then another coworker came by me. He said, I'm going home. You are the only one, stay here. Do you want to go home too? Then he said, oh, you wear strong perfume. I don't wear perfume because I'm allergic to a lot of strong smell, including this lady. But anyway, he told me about that. So I said, no, I don't wear perfume, but it's 6 p.m. Even though I wear perfume, it's supposed to be gone. Then we went home, and as soon as I reached home, someone called me. It was the nephew of that lady that volunteered, told me my auntie just passed away at 6 p.m., around 6 p.m. So I don't know if you believe in ghosts or not, or spirit, but it was the smell that really alerted me. And then before she was buried, and when I was cooking at home, I smelled the same smell. Actually, those were incense smell. She was a Buddhist. And the incense smell came from my kitchen. And told my husband, I said, it's the same smell that we talk about in the office. And then, the day before she was buried, in our office, another Filipino worker came running to my office. Hey, I smell the same kind, that you talk about. Then, finally, we said maybe she came back to visit us. Is that, So,
because I'm a practitioner, so sometimes I have experiences like people ask me to do poa, the ritual to help the deceased. And when I do it, sometimes I will see someone appear. And then I call back and say, I saw this kind of people, and they say, that's it. So it actually happens.
Yes.
Thanks for your presentation, and I learned much. And I feel very similar in Korean tradition and Chinese tradition. By the way, I understand that the music tradition is Taiwan and over Chinese, but what about the mainland China now? Because I was wondering, the Korean tradition in North Korea, I doubt they keep going because maybe communist rule, maybe most of them is quit. So how about the mainland China? Do you have any information that such we can understand through the materials between Song or Ming or just through the document, but living tradition in mainland China. How could you explain this? Keep going or something change?
Places outside of China, but places like mainland China and North Korea, what about these practices? Are they getting any freedoms?
I don't think they have. But I can know about immigrants. Well, I don't think they're allowed to practice anything in China. They are talking about superstition. So, but I do know that those immigrants who came to Hawaii, they do believe in Buddhism, although they don't burn incense at home. And sometimes they told me they secretly put something up in the back room. So when the government officials came to visit, they would just close the tin can, the tin can that we put oil into it, and they open just like a door. So they put their ancestor inside or whatever Buddha they believe to, and to offer something. At that time they don't have incense, but they just do whatever they want to do. By the time the government official come to visit, they close it right away and it becomes a tin can. So you don't know that they're worshiping something. So when they came out to the United States, they are so glad that we have temple here. So they go to the temple, and system here, we live in condominium, apartments and houses, and especially in Hawaii, it's all in wooden buildings. It's kind of dangerous to burn incense. So that's why when you go to different temples, you see lots of Chinese immigrants coming to visit the temple instead of going outside of the temple. And after, I think this morning I mentioned about people supposed to, like a falling leaf, they have to find their roots. Now, there was that in China. Since they are not able to go back if the communists is going to occupy China for the time being, or they are afraid to go back, and they told the children, my ashes will be sending to San Francisco, because as I mentioned, their children are not able to find job in Hawaii. They move to the mainland, the United States mainland, anywhere, New York or San Francisco, Los Angeles. So when the parents die, they will send the ashes to San Francisco or any place that they can find a temple to put the ashes into the temple. Then the immigrant will have such a practice by going to the temple, to the earth god, to tell the earth god that I am sending my parents' ashes to San Francisco now. Please help us to see that we reach there safely and peacefully. So that's what they are practicing now. And you are going to see a lot of children, if their parents die in Hawaii, they will bring the ashes from here back to the mainland, United States instead of mainland China.
May I ask if there are basically very few temples in mainland China?
What is it?
There are very few temples?
Now they have temple. But we are talking about those people who came in to the United States about 20 years ago. They were not able to worship, but now they do. They do have temples.
Well,
In China?
yeah.
And now in mainland
In
China.
mainland China, there are some temples that are just relics. Some have been allowed to resume their religious activities. Because in the mainland Chinese constitution, it says that you have the freedom to believe, but you do not have the freedom to preach. So yeah, so you can go and observe. So in some temples on mainland China, you do have the fragrance of incense.
Yes.
And you do have, I mean, like the Lama Temple in
They do
Beijing.
allow to burn incense now in China.
But I have a question for the panel, if I can use my position. I've always wanted to ask this, but I never dared to quite ask this because it's such a layman's kind of thing. But let me ask anyway. The panel, each one of them, and also I think the pervading sentiment, understanding is that the difference between life and death is very little, especially from the Buddhist, Taoist point of view. It's a very commonsensical approach to burial and death. I mean, the Cantonese tradition, they have this thing called chokpa, they would even go and clean up the ancestors' bones, and exhume it and clean it up and put it, pack it together again. And yet, very few Chinese will buy a house next to a graveyard. There are apartments back here that are standing empty because they're too close to the graveyard. This is in the area of popular belief, feng shui you mentioned. Why is it there is this commonsensical approach to the feng shui of the graveyard, the spirits that come back and thank us, very practical things. And yet, there is this public choice of not want to live near a graveyard. At least I'm away from it anyway. Can anybody comment?
If any of you have been up to Mount Cemetery, and if you would look towards the west side, there's beautiful homes there. And those homes were selling for a very cheap price before, but the Chinese will not touch it. Many of our friends are Japanese, and they bought those homes, and these homes are costing a mint now. And from that position, if you will look back down, you're going to have a very good view of the cemetery. But I guess it's superstitious, Professor Kwok. And if you overlook that, you can get rich. Chinese missed their chance, so I can say that's the answer.
There's a third George. He's a big businessman. Yeah, go ahead.
It's interesting that the Tibetans actually do not have the same superstition. In fact, death is something very much an integral part of even ordinary Tibetans' lives. So they say that if they don't meditate on death in the morning, they waste the day. And if they don't meditate on death in the evening, they waste the night. So Tibetan practitioners will especially go to graveyards to practice meditation. And the higher realization the practitioner, the more of this kind of practice they will do. It's said that they can actually come into contact with any kind of disembodied spirits and help send them to a more fortunate rebirth. But I don't think Tibetans would be influenced in their real estate choices by proximity to a graveyard. But I have a question for Dr. Lin concerning organ transplantation. The Tibetans are very much concerned about the question of organ transplantation from the psychological point of view, feeling that to have surgery to cut out an organ at the time of death would disturb the consciousness and that moment of transition to the next rebirth. I understand that the Chinese hesitation stems more from a belief not wanting to cut the body. Could you please explain that?
Well, according to the Buddhist teaching, on the one hand, there's the Bodhisattva's way, talking about in order to help sentient beings, if they want your head, you give them your head. If they want your teeth, you give them your teeth. And on the other hand, there's a teaching that even when the Western doctor pronounces you dead, since the body is still warm, you are just in the process of dying. The consciousness is still there, so if you are even moved, it will be painful, not to mention to cut some parts out, right? So what shall we do? First of all, for example, in case of accidental or violent death, I think in those cases, because now we have reports on people coming back from near-death experiences after accidents, and at that time they actually already are out of the body, right? They even see what the paramedics are doing to them. So my thinking is like this. There are two cases. One is the normal death, then it's still a gradual dying process. Then there are other cases that's a sudden forced separation. Okay? So in case it's been forced to go out already, probably the operations won't cause suffering. And in case of still gradual normal death, it's a matter of choice. If you have firm belief in the Bodhisattva way, I believe that you will suffer, but by paying that price, you can save other people. So it's a matter of our choice. Yeah. Thank you.
There's another question there.
Yes.
Another question for Professor Davis. You mentioned about feeding the corpse. Can you maybe expand on that a little bit? Because I've heard a Korean friend of mine said that used to be a tradition in Korean funerals where they actually would place mouthfuls of spoonfuls of rice in the corpse to feed him on his way. Or I'm not sure exactly. Could you?
Sure. Well, let me just say generally that Chinese religion is feeding is central to Chinese religion, and all Chinese religion from the ancient, most archaic times was based on basically, I mean, literally in the ancient times, feeding your ancestors both wine and food, or what was then really beer, rather than wine. And most Chinese rituals, no matter religious rituals, no matter what kind of religion they belong to or whether they're festivals, all also involve a communal meal, a meal performed by all the participants. And you know, in these rituals that I'm describing, yes, these classical rituals, which were maintained by the elite for 2,000 years, you know, feeding, they did feed them, but they didn't literally feed the dead, but they didn't necessarily always believe that the dead needed the food or needed this living food. In other words, it had become for some a symbolic act, something you did. But
they didn't actually put food into
well, they did at this time, but not necessarily always. Sometimes it's just laid out, like for the gods, food is laid out and they consume its essence, not necessarily its substance, which is then shared out among all the participants afterwards, whether in the home after a funerary ritual or in the marketplace in front of the temple to all the poor and the beggars and others who can have that food as well. And there's a kind of parallel between the food for the beggars and the poor and the food for the hungry goats in a certain way.
Speaking of food, I was wondering, Mr. Young, when you gave your presentation, you spoke about the offerings that were made at the grave sites. And I noticed that most of the items on the menu were meat. So I'm wondering how the Buddhists would respond to this situation. Do they participate in Qingming? And if they do, how would they handle this custom of offering meat which they would feel comfortable with?
Let's say the meat itself is mostly chicken and fish and duck, but not beef. At a funeral, after the services, strict Chinese tradition is not to serve meat. But if you attend one of these recent ones, these younger generations, they'll have a xin choy with beef and things like that. And as long as you don't have any old-fashioned folks, they will not be criticized. As far as the food that we have there, we leave it there, and there's some talking about some youngsters coming around and scavengers and pick up the food and eat. It doesn't happen anymore at the Monong Cemetery. We do have our supervisor, Benny Sacco, to pick up the food almost 2 days after that, not later than that. But the meat itself is actually chicken and fowl and fish, not the beef itself. Does that answer your question?
The priest you have there was an Taoist, not a Buddhist.
Yes, a Taoist priest, yeah. By the way, besides having Buddhist burial and Taoist, we do have church services and so forth, besides allowing any national to come in. In regards to feeding the corpse, any of you have heard of when a person dies, for a man they put a diamond, for a woman they put a pearl. You understand that, of course. Not to say anymore, keep them quiet, something peace. If a man dies, they'll put a 10-cent coin in there to seal the person's mouth. If a woman, they'll get a pearl and put it in. And I know when my mother died, she was making about 7 clothing, Dr. Lin, the Chinese believe in that. And the last one was a white one. That's the one that she was supposed to be wearing first. She did not finish that. So when she was in the hospital, we couldn't understand her why. She said, "Don't touch my room." And then because of our ignorance, I told my wife to go ahead and clean it up, and we ordered a new bed because she was coming out. And we painted the room and changed the rug, and she got very upset. And the reason behind that was she didn't want us to find the 6 clothing. And finally she died. We couldn't sew it. my wife couldn't sew it. We have to have outside it because of the needle. I prick her spirit. This is Chinese custom nowadays, I guess.
What do you mean by prick her spirit?
They felt that the spirit might be coming back right after death. And then if we play with needles, we might accidentally hurt her. So we sent that last white clothing out to dressmaker to make, or some close friends.
Our Qingming festival is a folk festival. So no matter you are Buddhist, you're Christian, or Taoist, we all come to make offering to our ancestor. So when we talk about meat, I think it's okay to serve meat, especially we bring a big roast pig to during the offering.
Professor Davis, I'm sorry. When you talk about spirit possession, I assume it can be, benevolent or malevolent. Could you say some more about that? What determines which, there are any cultural beliefs about which way?
Well, in China, it means that people go into trance, and the group around them interprets this trance as that the person has identified their personality with an ancestor or either a ghost or a demon or a spirit. And so they can speak in the voice of this spirit. They can talk to the living. They are mediums. And this is still quite common in Taiwan and Hong Kong, and now increasingly again in Southeast China. And the spirit mediums were basically the central religious figures in Chinese villages, and from ancient times until now. And they would become, during the festival of the gods, the earth gods, which you spoke of here, the earth god's birthday, there would be processions, and they would become, some young boy would become possessed by this earth god, and demonstrate the god's power when he was possessed by performing all kinds of exotic acts and things like this. And this represented the kind of communal identity of the village. And this has remained fairly consistent in China for 2,000-3,000 years. And in a way, all Chinese religions have to deal with this and come back to it in some way. You can also be possessed by malevolent spirits, and then in that case, you call it a Buddhist monk or a Taoist priest to help you overcome it. Well, it's usually, I would say that usually, yes, but it's usually this way of dealing with what we would call in the West psychosomatic illnesses. And when these occur, this is a purely Western view, but these situations, that is, you might go to it, let's say you're feeling a certain way, you might call a priest in and say, I'm feeling this way, and he'll examine you and he'll say, well, you got a medical thing, go see a Western doctor. Or he'll look at you and say, all you got is this, go to the Chinese, the herbal medicine doctor, the pharmacist. Or he may say, no, this has nothing to do with physical. This is a demonic illness. This is caused by your deceased aunt or something like this. In other words, and that generally includes those things which we would call in the West more psychosomatic, psychological type illness. But the Chinese are very functional and they can accommodate all of these. They can clearly distinguish between things that a herbalist can take care of, a Western doctor, a Chinese doctor, a Confucian doctor, and an exorcist, and so we make use of psychiatry,
I had a question for whoever. During the last several weeks, we had presentations about the differences in traditional cultures at the introduction and then through the development of Buddhism. In China, how did Confucianism influence the development and practice of Buddhism, particularly in the areas of filial piety and ancestor worship?
Confucianism, basically, for any religion to be successful in China, to persist, it had to ultimately deal with the ancestor cult in China. And so what we see is that after Buddhism came from India, and during the 3rd, 4th, and 5th centuries AD, and began to flourish during that period, ultimately it won basically the hearts of the Chinese masses by the 5th, 6th, 7th centuries, by essentially becoming the mediators of the ancestral cult. That is, and because Buddhism was early on was very much attacked, I don't think for good reason, but it was very threatening to the Chinese because, you know, they don't like people leaving home for life, you know, without ancestors, producing children and other things. So to the early Chinese, this was a very shocking thing. But in many ways, Buddhism proved that they could deal with filiality and the ancestor cult as well as any Chinese, and so they became, in fact, the prime arbiters of that cult for almost a millennium. And there's really ultimately no contradiction except in the minds of some very adamant ideological Confucians between Buddhism and the kind of Confucian worldview of the Chinese. I don't know if that helps explain anything. But you know, so that the ritual that I described to you is the ultimate filial act to your ancestors, to perform, to be a donor for these Buddhist rituals. And the Buddhist community, the Sangha and the monasteries became, you know, the primary repository, you know, for both, for many of the rich and for most of the poor of the kind of their ancestral cult.
Of course, Confucianism presupposed certain very, very old ancestral cult worship.
Yes.
Because worshipping ancestors is not a Confucian existence, it's a Chinese existence. And then all these outlooks on life and civil life, religious life evolved. So there's a confusion of a lot of ways. But the insistence on the ancestor, you know, feeding the corpse and serving meat, I mean, it's all pre-religious, pre-historic religious practices. So what George says that we Chinese do this, he's referring to a whole set of practices that evolved and then diluted, convoluted by philosophies and religions. Of course, there's a lot of mutual mistrust at critical times of the various teachings. Confucianists like to interpret themselves as being more rationalists and not driven by religious beliefs. But then, who knows, some members of the family might want to invite a Taoist in to put an amulet here, or Buddhist here to burn some incense in the right corner of the house, and so forth. Superstition ought to make you rich.
Yes. You know, may I just add to Professor Kwok that for the many days and years that I've been at Monroe Cemetery, it's very touching to see people come around with some flowers and pray to the deceased. Maybe like to, you know, remember there's a sentimentality attached to it more than Taoism, more than Confucianism. We landscape the place because we can't go from grave to grave to landscape, mainly to make the place look good and honor these people that are buried there. And then just yesterday, when Professor Lin was up there doing some ceremony, I don't know whether you saw a young middle-aged lady girl. She goes up every week, and the mother comes up every week too, and her grave is most beautifully decorated with fresh flowers. That's where they have the burial yesterday. And it's very touching. And we have a baby section in the front. As you face the cemetery, the grand ancestors' tomb is on your right. That's the baby section. Many times I've seen family members come in with a bouquet of flowers or a basket of flowers, and they even bring their own water, not knowing whether we have water is all connected already. And it's very touching. And it's because of that that gave us incentive to continue on. And the other phase, of course, we like to foster and perpetuate Qingming.
One last question. Okay, all right.
Earlier this morning, I believe it was Sister Ernst was talking about Alzheimer's. This question's for anyone. And it made me wonder, when a person does have a disease or illness where they're going in and out of consciousness or awareness, or they are suffering from a loss of memory, how do you facilitate them preparing for their death to achieve a kind of peacefulness, to prepare them to die? What is the relationship between rational consciousness and spiritual transcendence within the Buddhist belief system?
Of course, as I understand it, the most important thing is preparing one's own mind for any eventuality. I learned this actually the hard way when I got bitten by a snake and almost died about 5 years ago in India. And I found that during the 3 months that I was in the hospital, my meditation practice was really important, and I wished I'd done more of it, because especially in great pain, controlling the mind is not an easy thing to do. Now, when a person loses consciousness, at least in the Tibetan tradition, and I believe in the Chinese also, there is a tradition of chanting for them. As we learned earlier this morning, the bedside service, the relatives or friends can gather around and do some chanting on the person's behalf. And this actually happened when I was very critically ill. A young monk from the Dalai Lama's monastery came and did certain recitations for me. And so it's said to have a certain power, even if a person is unconscious, to hear teaching. Tibetans have many stories about, birds that overheard the recitation of the sutra and gave the higher rebirth in the next lifetime. So it's both. It's individual responsibility for the practice and preparation, and then in cases where that's not possible, in great pain or unconsciousness, that friends and family can also help. And it's said to be much better than the tape recorder idea. Some people have been programming their computers to recite Omitopo or Kumani Padme, but most of the bliss masters I've talked to really laugh at that idea. So it has to be some motivation, some energy input.
But I have experience of my sister's mother-in-law. She was in coma in LA. Actually, she was a member of the Fountain Temple in Hawaii. So when my sister called me about that, then I said, why not I go down to see the, Sifu? And then I talked to her, and she gave me the tape, just the tape that Dr. Lin just played today. So she took it to the hospital and played it close to her ear, and and when you look at her, she was very peaceful. So after a week, she died peacefully, as compared to a week before. So I think it does help.
It does help, and I just want to add that one thing you can do is when every day you do your own practice, at the end you dedicate your merit to helping the particular ones you know, besides to all sentient beings. Yes.
Where can you obtain that tape?
Qingming, the lady behind you, just contact her. You will be able to get a copy.
Thank you.
Free copy. It's a free.
Well, any further? I guess the hour is 4 o'clock.
Sorry, one more thing, because it involves helping others, very important. The other thing is someone is old-timer, then you cannot make her change, right? but you like play the tape so that she has the chance to hear. That will help too.
Okay. I have one question, and I think it'll be a quick question. They often say that when Buddhism comes to a new land, it takes about 300 years for it to adapt and to really become embedded in the society. And here in America, Buddhism has been in America probably, I guess, since the late 1850s when immigrants have come over and so forth and brought their practices. And I was wondering how you feel about the future of Buddhism in America, how you see it progressing, and I think, just a brief little mention. Dr. Daniel?
Well, I think how it will spread depends on the need of the population. And now that the pace of the society is moving so fast, everyone's attention is much stronger than before. So the need for spiritual teaching is more, and also the spreading of information is much faster now. So I think, probably the spreading of Buddhism will be much faster.
I wanted to say, I know a number of people who had Alzheimer's in the city I left a few years ago. Now, what I noticed there, it wasn't in a Chinese culture where the whole familial relationships were quite different. But what happened there between family and caretakers and the person who was sick was codependency. It was a very pathological relationship. Because the person develops psychological, from the medical condition. I don't know what, any group is doing about that.
Well, I think we will have to call a halt to a very interesting afternoon. Let it be a temporary halt. I'm sure the discussion will continue. So formally, the session ends right now.
Okay.